Connected Homeschooling, Episode 9.
Welcome to the Connected Homeschooling Podcast, where we connect homeschooling families like yours with leaders, authors, speakers, and all-around interesting people who provide great conversations, tips, and advice. Now here's your host, Devin Dabney.
Well, hello, and thank you for joining me on this week's episode of the Connected Homeschooling Podcast. I am your host, Devin Dabney, and I'm glad to be back for another episode. This week, my guest is Kendra Fletcher. She's a homeschooling mom of 8, and she also shares on her blog, preschoolersandpeace.com. Seems like an oxymoron to have preschoolers and peace, but she shares in her blog and gives some advice during this interview that I think will be very helpful to many people. So stay tuned for that interview with Kendra Fletcher. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is Kendra Fletcher. She's a homeschooling mom, a wife, writer, and speaker. And she blogs about homeschooling your older kids with younger kids underfoot at Preschoolers and Peace. And she also has an author blog at KendraFletcher.com. Kendra, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks very much. It's great to be here.
Okay, well, I'm glad to have you here, and I know probably as much as I'm glad to have you on the Connected Homeschooling show, my wife is probably equally as glad because we have some young kids, and she's trying to accomplish this task of homeschooling with young kids underfoot. So I'm definitely glad to bring you on and have you share with our audience. So why don't you tell us a few things about yourself and just introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, I think I'm one of those old homeschoolers now. I have been homeschooling for 17 years, and almost 17 years this January. We have 8 children. Our oldest is 20, and then our youngest is 5. And so really, when we started homeschooling our oldest, I also had a 2-year-old and a newborn, and I just have never homeschooled without little people underfoot. It's kind of all I've ever known. And so when I began blogging about it 8 years ago, that was my heart, was to walk alongside other moms who were starting to homeschool with little ones and thinking, how do I do kindergarten? And also I have this toddler and this nursing baby. And so that's been my heart all along, is just equipping moms trying to do this very difficult thing, as you know, with your own life.
Well, thanks so much for sharing, and I wanted to bring you on as an inspiration and encouragement to moms who may be facing a similar situation or maybe something that is coming in the future for them. And one of the purposes of the Connected Homeschooling Podcast is to encourage and educate our audience. And one way that we do it at the beginning of every episode is to have our guests to share a scripture or a quote that would be an inspiration to the listeners. And so you prepared a quote, and why don't you share that with us?
I did. It's probably the world's shortest quote, though. I love grace wins, because in our own parenting journey, where I think initially our kids were grand experiments, we've just learned that to pour out grace over their young lives and to pour out grace on ourselves, I think especially as homeschooling moms, we just take on so much of a burden and guilt sometimes. And so in the end, in the middle, at the beginning, grace wins every time.
I agree with you. And one thing that I've seen many times is that homeschooling moms, or even sometimes the dads, will take on that burden, and we place so much on ourselves because of the nature of what we're doing. And it's easy to compare yourself to what other people are doing, and you get into that comparison that really isn't fair. And so, like you said, grace wins. We should all extend grace to ourselves and even to our family. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely been a huge catalyst for change in our home when we've just realized that we all needed a big, healthy dose of grace.
Well, let's jump into your homeschooling journey. And
Yeah.
you mentioned homeschooling for 17 years now. How did you get started with homeschooling?
Well, the big joke or the funny part of all of this is that I never wanted to homeschool. This is back in the early 90s, and homeschooling was still weird back then. It was just really the very serious Christians who were doing this, and I said I would never do that. But lo and behold, we had this precocious, bright firstborn boy, and I just knew as a 4-year-old active little guy with quite an imagination who was in trouble a lot, and not in trouble like, rebellion, and I mean, certainly he had his little issues like every child, but he was just so busy and bright. He, was making these grand schemes happen, and, suddenly I've got things on fire and stuff like that. And so, yeah, and I thought if I put this child in a kindergarten classroom, he'll just be in trouble all the time. So, just reluctantly said, what do you think about homeschooling? And my husband, who's the greatest cheerleader in the world, said, go for it. Why not? You're going to do a great job with preschool at home, so just do that and let's see where it goes. And so I did, and that was in January before he turned 5 in March, and by May he was reading. And so then I had this problem on my hands of what do I do with this precocious, always in trouble, creative, bright boy who was also reading. That was just a recipe for disaster in a kindergarten classroom, I thought. So, okay, but, first grade, he's going to school. But, as the Lord does these things in our lives, we then really developed an academic vision. And we just saw the possibilities that we had at home, particularly because we live in an area with not great educational options. So for us initially, it was an academic choice. And then we began to see that having our kids at home was an avenue for discipleship and gave them an opportunity to create really great relationships with each other. So we were kind of sold by the beginning of his first grade year, and he graduated early, 3 years ago, just a year early from high school, and without ever having gone to school. So there you go. I never was going to homeschool. And then here we are, 17 years later, still homeschooling.
How many times have I heard that before?
Yeah, exactly. God is so funny with our plans, isn't he?
Definitely. Now, I know that there are many different flavors of homeschooling and styles and approaches. Was there any particular curriculum or a particular method that you used or continue to use?
Yeah, really, there at the very beginning there, I believe that The Well-Trained Mind by Susan Wise Bauer and Jesse Bauer came out in 1997. I haven't checked that, but just in my memory, I think that's about when it came out. And that's about when we started homeschooling, maybe 1998, somewhere in there. And I remember hearing this buzz about this book and classical education and whatnot. And so as I began to read that, and there were these funny little old message boards on the Well-Trained Mind back then that, seem so archaic now. But at the time, it was sort of like a lifeline to all of us moms trying to figure out how to do this classical education thing. And so that's really what we did in the beginning. And it's morphed and changed and, become unique to our home over the years. So I would say we sort of loosely classically educate. I think I'm more interested now in what my individual children need. And so if somebody else needs a little more hands-on or, something like that, then I don't hesitate to make changes. But our skeleton or spine is really kind of a classical model.
Now, did you face any challenges with homeschooling, or do you face any now?
Yes, I have days I can't stand it. So that's a huge challenge, yeah, or years actually. There's just been years. I think I went through that 7-year itch, about that time, and just feeling like, can I keep doing this, but not also seeing God opening any other doors. so I didn't really feel like I had great options, or that God was saying, hey, I'm going to shut the door on this season, and now you're going to put them in school. So it was just a matter of one day at a time during that season. And then, of course, spent 15 years pregnant or nursing a baby, and sick for a lot of that time in my pregnancies, and that had its unique challenges as well. But I tell people all the time that with those obstacles we had, somehow on the top end of things with our two who graduated, the oldest graduated early and will have his bachelor's degree a year early. Our second got into the university he wanted to go to and then eventually didn't go, but that, he met the academic goals that he had set for himself, and that's in spite of years of pregnancies and babies and sicknesses and not feeling like homeschooling or whatever. So homeschooling works. You just kind of put one foot in front of the other and trust God each day.
Now, with having 8 children, how do you balance your time with homeschooling amongst the kids with different grades or subject matter?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, there's just so many times I think people will say, how do you do it all? And I say, I really don't know how I do it all. I think I just do the next thing, and then, we have learned some tricks along the way that I think a lot of homeschoolers have learned. And one being that we have a time in our day that is kind of a group teaching time. We call it circle time. You can call it anything you want, but for us, that's what we've always called it. I don't even remember why, but it's the time of day when I just sort of gather everybody who is available, and we spend time in the Word together, or we pray together. We do anything that I can throw into that time as a catch-all. So things that I wasn't getting to initially, like maybe poetry memorization or scripture memory, or writing letters, thank you cards after Christmas or whatever, and we would throw it into that circle time. And it's looked different every season depending on ages of kids or what our needs are. Right now, for us, that means the kids that are all doing our history curriculum are in that time together, and that's when I teach history a couple of days a week. And so that's been one trick on how to manage everybody, is figuring out what I could do with everybody all together that didn't depend on an age or grade level. And then the things that did, like math, what else, writing, maybe language arts, that are more grade specific or level specific, then those were the things I would tackle kind of one-on-one, or us all sitting in the schoolroom together and working on individual subjects.
Okay. And I think you definitely speak from experience and finding out what works for your family. I sense a theme in what you've been saying so far, that you just take the next step, and you don't necessarily have to have it all figured out at the beginning. And so it just kind of, the Lord shows you what's the next step, and you take that, and the next thing you know, you look up and you may actually have some that are graduating in that process. You're at the end. Absolutely.
It's crazy how that happens. And right now our youngest little guy is brain injured, and he's really has a big question mark over his little life and what it is he's going to need. And I was just telling somebody at church yesterday that I am in a season with him where I only can see what's in my hand right now. That's all God's allowing me to see with our little boy. He's not letting me see what the next step is. He's not, we don't know where we're going with this, or what next year will look like for school with him. And so I'm only looking at what's in my hand, and I think it's God's way of saying, hey, Kendra, I know you think you've got this figured out, but I want you to just trust me, because I care for Joe, and I love him, and I created him the way he is, and just trust me. I've got it all. I've got your back. So, yeah, I think, we're in seasons like that, even with our kids who aren't brain injured, that sometimes God just says, this is what's in your hand, and trust me, because I've got it.
Now, let's get to a big question that always comes up when you tell people, well, I'm homeschooling or I homeschool my kids,
yes.
they tend to ask, what about socialization? Do you participate in co-ops or extracurricular activities? They ask these different things because there's this insinuation that the kids are going to lack social skills. So how do you address that?
Yeah, isn't that a funny question? Because you think, I don't know about your family, but for our family, we had the opposite problem. And we were always trying to stay home, or get our kids to stop having friends come over after church, or whatever. And so, yeah, we've done different things over the years. We've done co-ops. We've done classical conversations. I don't know if you're familiar with that program. Mm-hmm. Our kids have been in sports. Our 3 boys played on a water polo team together for a couple of years. They've been in music. Our girls right now sing in a children's choir that sings at the symphony. Lots of opportunities to be around people all the time. And so I just kind of laugh at the socialization thing. And I think you'll find as your kids get older and people are around them and realize, oh, they're not weird, or, oh, they can actually have a conversation, that question just disappears. So hang in there.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I've noticed even with some of my previous guests, that it really isn't so much the problem of these kids are sheltered and not around anyone. It's really a matter of, do we actually have the time at home? Because there's so many activities and friendships, and you can definitely get to the point where you're socializing a whole lot, and you're really needing to focus on time at home.
Yes, indeed.
Well, let's transition and talk about your blog, or both of your blogs, but really, I guess in this case, Preschoolers in Peace. Now, when I think about that name, and many parents may think about it with preschoolers, sometimes they may have a struggle in finding peace in that situation. So,
I know.
So how did you get started with that, and just share with us some of the things that you talk about on the blog?
Well, it's funny you said that, because the number one thing people will say to me if they've never heard of the blog is, really, isn't that an oxymoron? You can't have preschoolers in peace, But I try to remind people that peace doesn't necessarily mean quiet, because I would say our home is rarely quiet. And yes, they still have tantrums, and yes, there's still management issues and all of those things, but just the things that we've learned along the way, or I'm a really administrative, organized kind of person. It's just how my brain works. And so equipping moms with some of those tools that can bring a measure of peace into your home, so that you're not flying by the seat of your pants every single day. That can happen once in a while, where you have a day that's just chaotic or crazy, but if that's your constant every day, you just won't survive. And so that's really what the blog, what my intent with Preschoolers in Peace is. And it started because I was asked to speak on this topic at a local homeschool convention, and just it's a perennial issue. How do you homeschool these older kids with little ones underfoot? And I was answering so many questions after that workshop that a friend of mine said, you ought to just start a blog and put all that information on there. And so that's what happened, and then it just snowballed into this wonderful resource, because it's been around for so long, and it had so many people contribute to it and comments, and there's just so much information on there. And I just tell moms, if you can find one thing that will help you this week, then, ignore all the rest and grab the one thing that would bring a measure of peace into your home.
That's so great. I think it's easy, as I mentioned earlier, just to look at the big picture, but really just finding one nugget or one thing that can help you right now to get some relief or to make progress is a great thing to do. And it really doesn't have to be something difficult. And you just get some of the small wins, and it keeps you going.
Exactly. And, some moms and dads are so overwhelmed that the thought of stopping to create some sort of an organizational system is overwhelming. And so one thing, just one thing, and it may make the difference between survival and absolutely losing it.
Okay, now, thinking about, I guess, my wife with such young children, actually our oldest is 8.
Okay.
And then we have 5 going down to 1-year-old. And
you guys are busy.
yeah. And she's actually, we're actually expecting number 6 in April of next year. So
wow.
Definitely busy. So
yes.
Thinking about all of these little people walking around, we have one that's in 3rd grade, one in 1st grade. And I know this isn't everyone's situation, but just having these little people and preschoolers in addition to the older toddlers that are doing the schoolwork, I guess what would be your advice for someone like my wife, I guess in addition to just taking it one step at a time, what are some simple techniques or things, even like you mentioned, circle time?
Yeah. I would say also that I learned too late a couple of things, and one of them is I learned too late to say yes to help. I'm a real can-do kind of a person, and so, I don't need help. I'll be fine. And then, I'm drowning over here wishing that somebody would help me, but I've turned down everybody's help. So if somebody at church offers you a meal, or if somebody says, gosh, if anybody offers you anything, say yes. Say yes. The other would be that it took me too long to recognize what my frame was. And by that I mean it took me too long to understand kind of how I was wired. And my husband was really the one who recognized before I did that I needed time to process my day, my week, my month. And so he would say, you guys, Mom is off. Nobody can ask her any more questions tonight. She's going to go upstairs, or, he said, go wherever you want. Go out, get coffee. Go do whatever it is you need to do. And sometimes I would just go upstairs and shut the door and be off. And because I actually have a little introvert personality that needs time away to refuel, that was huge in survival for me in those years that were especially, where kind of the ages you have right now where they're just, those kids are so needy, kind of before their brains kick in, So, that may not be your wife. That may not be another mom, but that is definitely what I needed. And so maybe taking some time to ask the Lord or your husband or your best friend or somebody who has insight into how you tick, what is it that you need that's going to help you wake up the next morning and not want to just throw in the towel?
That's great advice. And I'll be sure to pass it on to my wife and the other parents that we know, because it's something that a lot of times you may not think about, especially when you mention just not waiting till it's too late to ask for help or to utilize the help that is offered, because we know what it's like to be able to help others and the appreciation that they experience for that. And we also have people that support us and help us, and so it's a great thing to reach out and just be the hands and feet of Christ as well in that regard.
Absolutely.
Now, the last segment of the interview is called 7 with Devin, and in this somewhat of a lightning round, I asked 7 questions and just really simply ask for your best answer for the benefit of our audience. And I grouped some of these together because they're pretty much related. And the first 2 are, what is the top free resource that you recommend for our listeners? And then the second question, what's the top paid resource that you recommend?
Oh, wow. Okay, so top free resource?
Yeah.
I would say, for me, well, the internet. I mean, you pay for internet, but you know what I'm saying. Even today, my son was doing some little thing in his workbook he had to do, and it said draw a turnip. And I said, do you know what a turnip is? He said, no. So I Googled turnip and showed him a picture, and he was able to draw the turnip. So, that's really helpful. We were studying Henry VIII this morning in history, and my girls wanted to know what his wives looked like. So we, one by one, pulled up every one of Henry VIII's wives on Google. So, it's hard to beat that as a resource. But I would say the other thing is our local library. And you don't even need to live in a place that has a huge, fabulous library. We live in a tiny farming community, but because we're part of the county system, we can get any book we want delivered to our little tiny branch. So that is huge. I can go online and reserve all the books we want and go pick them up at our library branch. And unless we lose one and we get a fine, they're free. So the other one you asked me was for a paid resource, my top paid resource.
Yeah.
Top paid resource. The one thing that is a standout curriculum item that we have loved for years and years, and I don't foresee not using, is the history curriculum called The Mystery of History. I love the author's heart. She brings everything back to Jesus and the gospel. And it is multi-ages, and most of the planning is done for me. And in fact, if you want to really have it be kind of somebody's done the work for you, I did a couple of tutorial videos on the Preschoolers in Peace blog. If you go on that search bar and search for how to plan the mystery of history, I have a couple of videos on how I've done it, and there's a bunch of spreadsheets there you can download for free that are done for you. So all of those resources ready to go, and that history resource has been my favorite curriculum of all time.
Okay. Well, and I'll link up to that in the show notes for this episode. I believe this is episode 9, so it's going to be at connectedhomeschooling.com/episode 9.
Great.
And now I think you mentioned the answers to the next 2 questions earlier in the interview, but if you have anything else to share, then please do. The first is, if you're able to start your homeschooling journey over, what would be your first step? And then what's your best advice for new moms?
I would pray a lot more. And I would see my first couple of children not as a project, but as people. I made that mistake early on of thinking that if we did X, Y, and Z, they would turn out, A, B, and C. And that's just not the way God works. So we've had to go back and sit our oldest boys down and apologize for some of the choices we had made or things we had done that were really about us and not about them. So, we wanted to look good in our parenting and homeschooling, and they were going to help us look good. So I would go back and change that in a heartbeat. And grace wins. Pour out grace over those lives. And what was the other one you asked me? What was the second thing?
What would be your best advice for a new homeschooling mom?
My best advice for a new homeschooling mom is to relax. This is a marathon and not a sprint. And so if you can take deep breaths and realize that there are going to be things you will not cover, there will be things you will miss, and that's entirely okay. If your kids were in school, they would miss things too, and things would not be covered. So just take a deep breath and relax and know that if God's called you to do this thing, He is going to be the best resource, and He's got it. So don't set yourself up for feeling like it all depends on you, because it doesn't.
Great advice. Now, what has been the greatest reward of your homeschooling experience?
I would say that the greatest reward, and, by the grace of God, has been the relationships in our home. And that doesn't mean that all of our kids adore each other and, never yell at each other. They do. they do have scuffles, and they do say unkind words, and they, all of those things are still present in our home. But I think these kids understand that when it comes down to it, this family is going to always be supportive of them. We had a family crisis occur this summer, and our 12-year-old was just undone by it, and she just sobbed and sobbed, and I said to her other siblings, this sister is going to be the sister you're probably going to turn to in your life, because she will always laugh with you, and she will always weep with you. And that's a gift. And I'm really thankful for that, because I know we didn't begin homeschooling with that even on the radar. And that's been a happy surprise.
Okay. Now, what has been the greatest challenge for you in homeschooling?
I think probably now the greatest challenge is just not growing weary in well-doing. And I don't say that at 17 years in. I say that at, like I said, probably back at 6 or 7 years in. And just realizing that we are not, we're not necessarily, God may have other things for us down the line, but we really have a mindset of being in this for the long haul, whatever that means, whatever God decides, that's going to mean. Maybe that means every single one of our kids will always graduate from home. But, we've learned never to say never and never to say always. So we no longer say we will always homeschool and we will never put them in school, because we just don't know what the future holds. But in the meantime, we are in this for the long haul, and there are days I wish I could walk away from the mess and the laundry and the schooling and the resistant attitudes some days that don't want to do what I've asked them to do. And those are the times where I just have to look up and say, you know what, you called me to this, and so I really need your help. And grace, just asking for grace and mercy.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And I guess to bring it to a lighter note in this interview, what is the unique talent or characteristic about you that most people may not know?
Ooh, well, this is really silly, but when I read aloud to my kids, I knit. So I can do two things at one time. Is that impressive that I can knit and read aloud to my kids?
We'll have to get this on video so we can we can get it out to the audience.
Yeah, this is a skill I've acquired.
Well, as a benefit for our listeners sticking around toward the end, we try to share a resource of the week with them, or a couple resources. So why don't you share about your resources of the week?
Well, I have a couple of things that are available. One would be that if you go to the preschoolersandpeace.com site and scroll down to the bottom, you can sign up for my blog posts to come right into your email box. And right now I'm only blogging once a week, so that's not too intrusive, I hope. And if you do that, there's a free ebook for you that I've written called 10 Ways to Delight in Your Preschooler. And then I also have a book called Preschoolers and Peace, Homeschooling Your Older Children with Success While Loving the Little Ones at Your Feet. And then we do also have a Circle Time ebook and lots of resources on Circle Time if that's something that interests you.
Well, we'll be sure to link up to that in the show notes, and just make sure that our listeners go and check it out.
Yeah,
and
I have a coupon code for your listeners, Devin.
Well, that's great. We love coupon codes and anything that we can get from our guests is a great resource.
I have those two ebooks, and also probably, if I think about this through, every workshop I do at homeschool conventions or homeschool co-ops or whoever asks me to come speak on this, I have all those workshop MP3s available, and if you use the code CONNECTED, you can get 50% off of all of those resources, and none of them are above $5, so it's a little bit of encouragement, hopefully, that will last you a long time. So use the code CONNECTED, and that's good until the end of the month, the end of November.
Okay, well, great. So I'll link up to that, and we'll put the information out for our subscribers. And definitely get the word out so they can get these valuable resources. And to end our interview today, we just want to share with listeners the best way to reach you online. And we've talked about your website at Preschoolers in Peace, but what are some other ways that they can reach out and connect with you?
Yes, I'm on Facebook, and that's facebook.com/preschoolersandpeace. Also on Twitter at Kendra E. Fletcher. And then, you and I have had a little bit of talk about our podcasts. My husband and I podcast at Homeschooling IRL, and that's sort of the large variety of homeschool topics. So that's a brand new show for us, and we're enjoying that. And you can find that at facebook.com/homeschoolingirl. I'm also available by email, and I'm very happy to answer emails at Kendra@KendraFletcher.com.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest today, and I know that our listeners will be encouraged and inspired and also blessed by what you shared. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. This was really fun.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Kendra Fletcher from preschoolersandpeace.com. I invite you to connect with her at her blog and also on her Facebook page. And don't forget to take an opportunity to check out the resources that she mentioned, the ebooks that she has, and also to use the promo code CONNECTED in order to get discounts on some of the products on her site. And if you get to sign up for her email list, you'll also be able to get a free ebook as well. So take some time, connect with Kendra, and make sure you tell her that you learned about her on the Connected Homeschooling podcast. Join us next week for another episode of Connected Homeschooling, and we'll connect you with the people, the resources, and tools that you need to make your homeschool a success. God bless you.